Iran Daily Briefing. Thursday, March 26, 2026. Pakistan's foreign minister confirmed this morning that Islamabad is actively relaying messages between Washington and Tehran, and that Iran is now deliberating on a formal US proposal to end the war. That single sentence covers a lot of ground. It means back-channel diplomacy is operating. It means there is a proposal on the table. And it means nearly 4 weeks into a conflict that has reshaped the Middle East, both sides may be looking for a way out. Later in the episode, we'll explain what that proposal involves, what Iran has said publicly, and what the obstacles remain. It has been 26 days since the United States and Israel launched what the Pentagon is calling Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated military campaign against Iran that began on February the 28th. Since then, the conflict has moved fast and in multiple directions simultaneously. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed in the opening strikes. That single fact has altered the internal dynamics of the Iranian state in ways that are still unfolding. The Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC, have consolidated power in the vacuum. Iran has attempted to close the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. A US aircraft carrier has reportedly come under Iranian missile fire, and oil markets have been rattled by both the fighting and by the signals coming out of Washington. Today, the story is pulling in two directions at once: escalation on the ground and diplomacy behind the scenes. Here is what we're covering. The Pakistan mediation channel and what it tells us about where negotiations stand. The killing of the IRGC's naval commander near Bandar Abbas, and what that means for Iranian naval operations in the Strait. The EU's accusation that Russia is helping Iran target American forces, and the oil market anomaly that occurred just before President Trump made a significant public pledge. Let's get into it. The Pakistan channel, and what a deal might look like. Start with what we know. Pakistan's foreign minister said this week that Islamabad is serving as an intermediary between the United States and Iran. The message, as relayed by NPR's correspondents covering the talks, is that Pakistan is not just passing greetings, it is carrying substantive proposals. The foreign minister said specifically that Iran is deliberating on a US offer. He did not characterize Iran's likely response, and he did not detail the full contents of the proposal. Separately, the Trump administration made its own public signal. At a cabinet meeting at the White House this morning, senior officials said there were, in their words, strong signs that a ceasefire deal could soon be reached. President Trump himself addressed Iran directly, saying, and this is a direct quote, "They now have the chance, that is Iran, to permanently abandon their nuclear ambitions and to join a new path forward." Trump also described Iran as begging to make a deal and called Iranian leadership lousy fighters but great negotiators. Those words are worth noting, not for their diplomatic precision, which is minimal, but because they signal how Washington is framing this moment publicly. The administration is presenting itself as negotiating from strength. Tehran has not publicly confirmed that it is deliberating on any proposal. That silence is not necessarily meaningful. Iran rarely confirms back-channel activity until it has decided how to use it. What we do have is one data point that cuts against the pure escalation narrative. The Iranian embassy in Spain posted on social media this morning that Iran would be receptive to any request from Madrid related to the Strait of Hormuz, citing Spain's commitment to international law. Al Monitor flagged that post. It is a single, carefully worded statement directed at a European government on a narrow issue. But it is notable that Tehran chose to say it at all. Now, what is actually on the table? Trump offered a concrete, if unusual, opening gesture this morning. He suggested that Iran allow 10 oil tankers, including some Pakistan-flagged vessels, to transit the Strait of Hormuz as a goodwill gesture in negotiations. Al Monitor reports that proposal came during the same cabinet meeting. The framing matters here. Trump is not asking Iran to end its blockade outright. He is asking for a symbolic opening, a gesture that lets both sides claim some movement without committing to anything irreversible. The nuclear question is clearly part of the broader framework. Trump's language about abandoning nuclear ambitions echoes long-standing US and Israeli demands that go beyond the original 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which limited Iran's enrichment activities but did not permanently end its nuclear program. Whether Iran is prepared to discuss anything resembling permanent abandonment of nuclear capability is a significant open question. That was always the hardest issue. It remains so. One other factor shaping this diplomacy, the internal state of Iran's government. Since Khamenei's death on February 28, according to reporting from Al Monitor, the Revolutionary Guards have become the dominant force in Iranian decision-making. President Masoud Pezeshkian is nominally in office. He appointed a new Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council this week, a former the IRGC figure named Mohammad Bagher-Zolghada, but real authority appears to have shifted toward the Guards. That matters for any deal, because historically, Iran's nuclear and military posture has been controlled not by the elected presidency, but by the supreme leader and the IRGC. With the supreme leader gone and the IRGC dominant, negotiators on both sides are dealing with an Iranian power structure in transition. Here is the concrete thing to watch: whether Iran responds to the tanker proposal, formally or informally, through the Pakistan Channel in the next 48 hours. A yes, even a partial one, would represent the first tangible diplomatic movement since the war began. A rejection or continued silence would suggest the IRGC leadership is not yet prepared to negotiate under fire. Story 1. The Strait of Hormuz, blockade, fees, and a dead admiral. The Strait of Hormuz is 10 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Roughly 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passes through it. Iran has now blocked that passage, according to reporting from Al Jazeera's correspondents covering the region. At the same time, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the bloc of Arab states that includes Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and others, has lodged a formal accusation. The GCC's Secretary-General, Jassim al-Budaiwi, said Iran is imposing fees on ships attempting to transit the strait. That is a significant escalation in how the strait's closure is being characterized. It is one thing to physically block vessels. It is another to extract payment for passage through an internationally recognized shipping lane. The GCC's statement, reported by Al Jazeera, frames Iran's actions as a form of economic coercion, not just a military tactic. The UAE has its own accounting. Its ambassador to Washington, Youssef Al-Otaiba, wrote in the Wall Street Journal that Iran has launched more than 2,180 missiles and drones at the UAE since the war began. Al-Otaiba also wrote that a simple ceasefire is not enough, language that suggests at least one Gulf state believes any deal must include structural changes to Iran's military posture, not just a pause in fighting. That view may not align perfectly with Washington's, and it is worth tracking how the Gulf states position themselves as diplomacy moves forward. Then there is the naval dimension. Israel announced this week that it killed Alireza Tangsiri, the commander of the IRGC's naval forces, in a strike near Bandar Abbas, the Iranian port city that sits at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera and NPR both reported the claim. Iran has not confirmed Tangsiri's death. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said this week in a statement reported by Al Jazeera that Iran now has no Navy leader. That claim is almost certainly an overstatement. Iran's naval assets are not eliminated by the loss of one commander, but it reflects the scale of pressure the US-Israeli campaign has placed on Iran's maritime capabilities. What to watch? Whether Iran's ability to enforce its Strait blockade or its fee collection is degraded following Tangsiri's reported death. A disruption in the IRGC Naval Command could create gaps in enforcement. it could also create unpredictability, which carries its own risks for commercial shipping. Story 2. Russia, the EU, and the intelligence accusation. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas made a pointed accusation on Thursday. Speaking publicly, she said Russia is providing Iran with intelligence that Iran is using to target neighboring countries with drones and to target American forces. That last part is the sharper charge. One French news outlet, France 24, reported Kallas saying Russia is helping Iran, in her words, kill Americans. Kallas also described the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine as interlinked and urged the United States to increase pressure on Moscow over the intelligence sharing. A few things to note about this story. First, the sourcing. This is Kallas speaking on the record. The underlying intelligence she may be drawing on is not public. We cannot independently verify the specific claims about Russian intelligence provision. Second, the political context. Kallas has been a consistent advocate for a unified Western response to both Russia and Iran. Her remarks serve a strategic communication purpose. She wants Washington to see the two conflicts as connected, which would argue against the US striking a separate deal with Iran that leaves Russian support structures intact. Third, this matters for the diplomacy. If Russia is actively providing Iran with targeting intelligence, that complicates any ceasefire. A ceasefire between the US and Iran does not automatically end Russian involvement. And if Iran retains access to Russian intelligence infrastructure, the military pressure on US forces does not simply stop when the shooting does. Iran has not responded to Kallas's accusation. Russia has not responded? The Kremlin routinely denies involvement in Iranian military operations and has done so throughout the war. What to watch? Whether the United States officially endorses Kallas's characterization of Russian intelligence support. If Washington formally attributes Iranian drone targeting to Russian intelligence, that changes the diplomatic calculation with Moscow significantly. Story 3. The oil trade anomaly. This story is single-sourced, and we want to be clear about that. France 24 reported that thousands of oil contracts, described as a far higher volume than normal, were traded approximately 15 minutes before President Trump publicly pledged to halt strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure. Trump's pledge, when it came, caused oil prices to fall. That is the expected market response. If Iranian energy infrastructure is off the target list, supply disruptions look less severe and prices soften. The question this report raises is whether someone with advanced knowledge of Trump's statement used that knowledge to trade ahead of the announcement. That is, at a minimum, a serious question about information security around a significant presidential commitment. Whether it rises to the level of market manipulation or insider trading would depend on facts we do not yet have. Who traded, what they knew, and how they knew it. France 24 flagged the pattern. No regulatory body has opened an investigation as far as is publicly known. No White House official has addressed the timing. We are presenting this because the underlying facts, as reported, are notable. But given the single source and the absence of corroboration, listeners should treat this as a data point requiring further reporting, not as a confirmed finding. What to watch? Whether any financial regulator, congressional oversight body, or major news organization picks up this thread with additional sourcing. If the pattern holds up under scrutiny, it becomes a significant domestic story alongside the military one. Story 4. Inside Iran. Crackdowns and casualties. Two domestic Iran stories today that speak to how the war is reshaping life inside the country. First, Iranian police announced Thursday that they have blocked 61 bank accounts belonging to Starlink satellite internet users in the city of Yazd. Iran International reported this. Starlink is the satellite internet service that allows users to access the internet without going through Iran's state-controlled network. The Iranian government has blocked it repeatedly. Blocking bank accounts goes a step further than previous enforcement measures. It is financial punishment rather than just technical interdiction. Yazd is a provincial city of about 500,000 people in central Iran. The targeting of Yazd specifically may reflect a regional pattern of enforcement, or it may be a test case for broader financial pressure on unauthorized internet use. Second, U.S. Central Command spokesperson, Navy Captain Tim Hawkins, confirmed this week that approximately 290 U.S. service members have been injured since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28. Fox News reported the figure. The military has not released a detailed breakdown of those injuries or where they occurred. The figure covers wounded personnel, not fatalities. The Pentagon has not released a public casualty count for killed service members as of this briefing. The 290 number is a concrete measure of the human cost of the campaign on the U.S. side. Comparable Iranian casualty figures are not available from independent sources. What to watch on the domestic Iran story, whether the Yazd bank account action expands to other cities, and whether it represents a broader, the IRGC-led effort to control information flow as the regime consolidates under wartime conditions. We opened this episode with Pakistan's role as an intermediary. Now that you have the full picture, here is what that channel actually represents. Pakistan is in a delicate position. It shares a long border with Iran, has significant trade ties with Gulf states that are on the other side of this conflict, and has historical relationships with both Washington and Tehran. Islamabad has a track record of serving as a go-between in regional crises. It played a similar role in back-channel US Taliban communications. Its use here is consistent with that history. But the specific proposal on the table, the tanker passage request, reveals something about how Washington is approaching this. Rather than leading with maximalist demands on the nuclear question, Trump appears to be starting with a narrow, face-saving ask. Let 10 tankers through. Show the world the Strait can move. That creates the conditions for oil markets to respond positively, which benefits Trump domestically, and gives Iran a way to signal flexibility without formally capitulating. Iran's deliberation, as described by Pakistan's foreign minister, is genuine. The IRGC leadership, now the dominant force in Tehran, has to weigh the military reality, which is one of sustained losses, against the political cost of being seen to bend under American pressure. That calculation is not simple, and it will not be resolved quickly. But the fact that Pakistan is carrying formal proposals and that Iran is formally deliberating is itself a change from the first 2 weeks of this war, when both sides were largely not talking. Here is what to watch in the next 24 to 48 hours. The Pakistan Channel. Iran's response, or non-response, to the tanker proposal is the most important thing to track. If Tehran signals even partial acceptance through Islamabad, watch for a corresponding statement from the White House and a likely drop in oil prices. If Iran rejects it or stays silent, watch for renewed US pressure on the Strait, potentially including movement on the reported option of blockading or seizing Karg Island, the terminal from which Iran exports roughly 90% of its oil. Karg Island. Axios has reported that the US military has been examining options that include blockading or invading Karg. That option has not been confirmed as active policy. But Trump's pledge to halt strikes on energy infrastructure, the pledge that preceded the oil trading anomaly, creates a tension. If Karg is off the target list for strikes, is it on the list for a blockade? Watch for any US naval movement toward the island, or any statement from CENTCOM about rules of engagement near Iranian energy infrastructure. The IRGC Naval Command. The reported death of Alireza Tangsiri leaves the IRGC's naval operations in an uncertain state. Watch for Iran to announce a successor or not. If Tehran promotes a replacement quickly and publicly, that signals organizational continuity. If the appointment is delayed or made quietly, it may reflect deeper disruption to the command structure. The EU-Russia dimension. Watch for any US response to Callas's intelligence-sharing accusation. If the State Department or the Pentagon formally attributes Iranian drone targeting to Russian intelligence assistance, that will change the diplomatic framing around any ceasefire talks. Oil markets. With Trump's pledge to pause energy strikes and ceasefire signals in the air, oil prices have softened, but the Strait remains effectively closed. Watch for any gap between diplomatic signals and physical reality on the water. If tankers attempt passage and are turned back, markets will respond to the action, not the words. Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israeli authorities extended the closure of the mosque in occupied East Jerusalem until at least April 15th. The closure has been in place since the war began on February 28th. This is not primarily a military story, but it has the potential to inflame opinion across the Muslim world at a moment when diplomacy requires careful management of regional sentiment. Watch for any statement from Arab governments, particularly Jordan, which has a formal custodial role at the site, in the next 48 hours. Today's episode covered a conflict that is simultaneously escalating militarily and generating its first credible diplomatic signals. And understanding the gap between those two realities is essential to following what comes next. Join us tomorrow morning for the next briefing. If you found today's briefing valuable, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes every morning.